this episode of my conversation series, I had the pleasure of speaking with Bruce Ainsworth, who's the Vice President of Automation Innovation at Georgia Pacific. Bruce is a champion for utilizing technology to enhance workforce effectiveness in an Industry 4.0 world. We discussed his journey to behavioral science and how Georgia Pacific is taking an innovative approach to worker safety by leveraging behavioral science and AI. So I'd love to talk about your background and hear your story.
Yeah, so I'm a chemical engineer, and I spent most of my career in chemical plants, working to optimize chemical processes and helping plants run better and helping the people who run the plants get the information they need to do their jobs more effectively. So I started as a chemical engineer because it's pretty much my family's business. I'm a third generation chemical engineer, and the other part of my family is all public school teachers. So pat a teacher on the back these days. They could use some love. And so my dad came to my career fair in third grade, and he brought a mock distillation tower that had oil and water in it. And he explained it all to all his little 10-year-olds, and I was just hooked at that point to do that. So
nothing like the demonstration of science to just, hook the mind and heart of a little kid.
Yeah. So from that point forward, I was always focused on becoming a chemical engineer. So I was always interested in chemistry and physics and all those things. So when I graduated college, I was working in the oil field, and the job I had, I was pretty much worked by myself in deep South Texas. And I'd be on these great big ranches working in the gas fields that were in these ranches. And so it was like 2 hours from the highway to the well inside these huge ranches. And then you were generally like 6 hours away from any other civilization. So taking care of myself and crew became kind of a life or death thing. We didn't think about it that way, but it really was high risk. So we were always making sure the risks we took were in check with the scenarios that we were in. So we always try to be safe. But, if you don't have someone to tell you what safe looks like, or you get comfortable with the situation, you can start taking extreme risks. And so that can lead to bad things. So
it's very interesting to hear your journey from, a wide-eyed child seeing the, really interesting process happen of this, this distillation, to, a young adult where you start to do that at scale in the field, to moving to another role where it's not about the physics, the chemistry, the mechanics of, these processes, but rather the human side of it. And you've talked so much about people. You've talked about the relationships, in the diner between, workers and groups of workers. You've talked about the people that you were with out, when you guys were, in the cow field essentially, and the community that was there. And you've talked about how you needed to start to answer questions around efficiency, but you immediately started to talk about the relationship between efficiency and safety. And all of this is around human behavior. And now the new mandate is, includes AI. There's such a convergence of human experience, the history of industrial, the revolution. They were at such an interesting point.
Yes. Yeah. And early on in my supervision, part of the motivation to become a supervisor in the plant was because I wanted to tell the people to do what I wanted them to do, because as an engineer, I was seeing these opportunities to let's improve, do this, but I was just advising. And so I was really motivated to become the leader, and then I could drive the plant the way I wanted to drive it. Well, it took about 2 hours of being the leader to recognize that's not how you lead. And so it takes working with the people, and it turned into, if you want the plant to run better, you have to get everybody on board with running the plant better. And so you can't just tell people what to do. Nobody wants to live that way. And so, people want to be challenged, and people want to be heard, and people want to know that they're making a difference. And the quicker you can recognize that as a leader, the quicker you're going to get to success. And I think that's like an obvious thing, but when you're young and you come out of engineering school where no people skills are taught, these became the lessons I really mentored any new engineer on. Was I didn't, great, you can do differential equations and you can balance chemical formulas, but how can you connect an operator to changing a temperature on a vessel will make us $1 million? Or how can you connect a maintenance person to tie off on a scaffold? Because if they don't, they could slip and fall 100 feet and hurt themselves. Tell me how you do those things. And working with young leaders and future leaders on those things became really what I was doing as a leader in the plant. And so you think you're going to go work on a distillation column, but in fact, you're really just helping people through their day is what you end up doing. And once you recognize that and you see how it improves people's lives and how they feel better about themselves, it really motivates you to, that's what you want to work on. And so GP is like 30 times bigger than Coke fertilizer. So it gives me the opportunity to work and help that many more people. And so that was a big part of moving to GP. And so as we think about the Industrial Revolution and we think about the demographic change we're seeing in North America, it's becoming more and more critical to lead people differently, because they are a different group of people than what was there 20 years ago. And so the connecting to people to how they make a difference and connecting people to how you value their input really moves to the forefront. It doesn't, benefits and accolades kind of taking a back seat to this new generation. The newer generations are interested in making a difference in the world. And I think myself is kind of in that way, because when I think about the decisions I'm making and where I'm going with my life, it's to, what does the legacy look like? What does, when I'm 80 years old and I'm looking back, where did I make a difference and who did I impact? That's really where I'm thinking about when I'm making strategic plans inside my day. But not only that piece of it, but as the census data is showing us, I'm sure Canada has kind of the same census data where more and more people are moving to urban areas. Well, paper mills and chemical plants are typically not in urban areas. And so how do you work with the people that are in those areas? How do you attract people to those areas? And then how can you work with less people? That's really the big space that my group's working in, is how are we dealing with this demographic shift inside our company? Because in 10 years, our company is going to be an entirely different group of people. I mean, we have a majority of people who, because of their age, aren't going to be working anymore in 10 years. So addressing the demographic shift was a big motivation for GP to move into the Industry 4.0. If we can, because the paper industry has been around for a long time. And so these mills and these plants have had a steady stream of people, just like me, there's third and fourth generation people in these plants who all work, their whole family have worked in these plants. Well, those are kind of ending, and people are moving to bigger cities. People are getting educations and going and doing different things and getting out of heavy industries. So how are we going to capture that lost knowledge? How are we going to change from a people-dependent system to a system that doesn't necessarily need a person to drive the decision? And so that's where we think using AI, using information directly from the equipment, and putting that into a system where it doesn't need as many humans to make those decisions. That's kind of what we're shooting for. We're shooting to address our human capital deficit that we're fixing to hit. And so we've spent the last 5 years really engaged in the Industry 4.0, and we took a lot of steps prior to the pandemic to move work remotely so that we could have engineers in urban centers and not try to keep hiring engineers to be out in rural America. And so when the pandemic hit, we were pretty good shape because most of our stuff had remote access, and we had built systems that allowed for remote working. So Industry 4.0 has been good, and there's still opportunity to push it through the rest of our organization and figure out new ways to bring a data-driven culture into parts of our industry. And so our group thinks about things 5 years ahead of the operations group. And so if we think 5 years ahead, we're going to have less people, we're going to have more data, we're going to have more instrumentation. What are some things that we could do to get the organization a point of view of what 2028 looks like? And so that's kind of what we do in our group and how we approach the day.
We've talked a lot about in the course of our work together is the impact of this changing demographics on your worker composition, and the increasing reliance that you must have on technology and AI brings us to a point where the need for psychology is perhaps more important than ever, because it's not just a matter of augmenting decision-making through computer-based or data-driven systems, but being able to incorporate behavior science. And it's been very exciting for me to have these conversations with you, do this work with you, where we bring in the behavioral sciences. But obviously, I'd love to hear your point of view on that journey.
Yeah. So for me personally, the journey started with Moneyball and watching the movie. And the movie inspired me to read the book. And because at that point in time, that was, 8 years ago, I was trying to connect people to the value of data, and so like what we sometimes joke about, backing our thoughts with science is sometimes a revelation, and we chuckle about that. But that really, that was kind of the start of the journey, because it talked about what it took to make a change and break the old paradigms. And so a big piece of innovation is not necessarily finding cool technologies. It's more, the way I see innovation, it's more about seeing what cool things other people are doing and figuring out how you can do the same thing in a totally different space with a totally different group of people. To me, that's the definition of innovation. And so seeing what the Oakland A's were doing with data and just smashing the old paradigms was something that we were really trying hard to overcome in a chemical plant. And so once you start rolling that snowball, you move into other books. So we looked at the Undoing Project, and then that naturally leads into Think Fast, Think Slow, Think Fast.
Thinking fast and slow.
Thinking Fast and Slow. And then the new book, Noise. And then, so that was my personal journey that got me to you guys. But then kind of at the same time, my team was looking at, my GP team before I got here was looking at eye tracking. And they were trying to understand, how could we implement this new cool tool into helping safety? And how could we use this tool to help with console operators? So a console operator is someone who sits in front of 8 computer screens, and each screen has a different section of a processing plant. And each screen probably has 200 data points on it. And most of them are run in automatic or run by some part of the process. But the person is there to oversee and intervene if needed. And so understanding where their eyes are going and where their attention is pretty critical to keeping the plant optimized and keeping people safe. But in addition, we were thinking about eye tracking in forklift drivers to see where their attention was. And so eye tracking isn't really ready for that type of use yet, just because the technology isn't there and the software isn't there. But the ideas of attention were really intriguing to us. So we were trying to figure out who could help us with attention. And so that's how we came across you guys, because you guys were helping some other people in industrial safety. And you were referenced in some of the HOP literature. And so HOP is a new concept for GP, and helping to put science behind that philosophy is going to go a long way. Because once you start putting science to a philosophy, then you can put math to a philosophy. And then once you put math, then you can do engineering. And we're a company of engineers, and we always want to go back to being engineers. So I think humans are going to make mistakes, but what is your system doing to overcome those mistakes that humans make? And HOP has 5 principles, and the 5 principles are real key. And your audience is probably going to think there's, like no duh when you think about them. But the first principle is human error is normal. Everybody makes mistakes. We're all human. So you can't expect humans to be error-free. And so in previous safety cultures, or just culture in general, the assumption is humans can't be error free, and that's just an incorrect assumption. So you have to get grounded on that principle right off the bat, that humans are humans, everybody makes mistakes. And if you think they're not, we need to talk about AI, but we're going to talk about humans still. So the second one is blame fixes nothing. So in an investigation, it's easy to point the finger. It's easy to question their judgment at the time. And that doesn't really help anything, because if humans are humans and humans make mistakes, the majority of the mistakes aren't going to be malice or intentional. They're probably going to be because a cognitive process is broken down. So blame fixes nothing. But if blame, so the adverse to that is the third principle, which is learning is vital. So if you can set up after an incident, when you're reviewing an incident, that this is a learning opportunity, and that there's no, if you can get people to trust the investigation and trust that you have their good, their goodwill at, I'm trying to think of the right word. If you have their intent, best intentions at heart, they're going to open up to you, because they want to learn from they don't want to do it either. They don't want to have a repeat of an incident, because incidents aren't fun and usually they're life altering, and we don't want to do them. So I think everybody in the room wants to learn from them. So a big one that we spend a lot of time with helping the organization with is context. And the fourth principle is called context drives behavior. And so
right in our wheelhouse.
Yeah. And so
the other ones as fundamental principles, but this is the one obviously that speaks the most to me.
Yeah. And this is our biggest opportunity, because how do you get people to see context? Because everybody has their own filters of the world. And so if I see the world differently than you see the world, are we getting to the right context of the world, so to speak? And then the last principle is how a leader responds to failure matters. And so if anytime you have an incident, you fire everybody, nobody's ever going to talk about their incidents. So, but if anytime there's an incident, the leader is responsive to the needs of the individuals first, then is reflecting upon how they themselves, the leader, could make the incident have not occurred, and really focuses on how can we learn from this? How can we make sure it never happens again? How can we improve our overall system so that not just this one specific thing, but are we moving towards an incident-free workplace? So if leaders are responsive that way, the organization as a whole is going to have a positive tone to the situation. So
one of the other things that we've talked about is, first of all, with Moneyball, I very much agree with you. That's just such a revolutionary set of insights, not just for baseball, but for the boardroom. And that is the use of data, in particular statistics, in challenging our intuition, our heuristics by which we, the rules of the game that we built through our intuition, through legend, through myth, are not necessarily correct and valid. And one of the things that we can do to challenge that is to have data and patterns of data and have rich statistics that say, hey, that's actually not true. Look at these more complex patterns that, it takes a computer and it takes the math to surface and to put in our face. And Moneyball is so powerful and disruptive because of that. But it's not everything. If the data that's going in is biased, or if the data going in is limited, or if the reader of that data is bringing bias to the table, then there's only so far that these systems can go. And one of the things that we've talked about is as we employ these systems, we need to make sure that we're not introducing bias into the machine, that we're not reading noise out of the machine. And it's very important if we're going to have thinking and, feeling, I say that metaphorically, AI, then we need to have experts in the science of thinking and feeling in the design and in the development of these machines, and of course their implementation and adoption.
Yeah, and the way we look at AI in two forms. There's the popular AI of today that's using huge data sets and can take an observation from these huge data sets and can answer a question. But if the data starts dramatically changing, or you need to ask a different question, you have to go through that whole process over. Being that our data, we don't have a whole lot of data that's older than 2 years old. And we're not in an industry where there's 1 million cars on the highway, so we can collect a big data set quick. We have 35 paper mills, and there's only them. so it takes a while to make a big data set. So we started looking for AI that didn't necessarily need a large data set. And so what we've found some data that's using natural language processing and cognitive layers to interpret words and to start learning the way people learn. Now, I'm not saying it's anything like a person. It's just using words to build algorithms out of the words. And so from those domains and learning that corpus, we're able to ask any question inside that domain because it has all of that knowledge. Now, if we wanted to ask the same question at a different place, we'd have to teach it about that place with a different, whatever the differences are between the two bodies of knowledge. And so, so if we're thinking we're going to teach a machine the way we teach a 3-year-old to read, and we're thinking that the machine will be able to answer questions like a 4-year-old because it's been reading since it was 3, we probably should get people who know how 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds think, so that we can make sure we're being good parents, so to speak, to it. And so, getting you guys to help us think through how do we set up these databases and how do we ask the question the right way has been a novel idea in the AI space, I think.
So some of the work that we've done so far has been to help expand the point of view that is common around this idea of attention. And the going in premise that many people have is all we need to do is increase the attention that people have on their job, and that'll lead to more productivity, that'll lead to better safety, and so on. But our research shows that there's actually kind of some pros and cons with that. On the one hand, if people are too attentive, they might miss out on very obvious things. A really fun example of that is this idea of the invisible gorilla. When people are so dialed in, there's this idea of too much attention means you're blocking out other things. And this is a very natural process where we get honed in on a specific task, and it's very easy for us to miss something that is incredibly obvious. And that seems so surprising, but we've seen this happen time and time again. So dialing in on that attention and understanding the bounds of what attention actually means becomes a very, very complex concept very fast. And then on the other hand, we think, well, if all we need to do is, increase attention to improve that productivity or to reduce those mistakes or errors or, perhaps, safety incidents in a factory environment, we might see that, overlooking this fact that mind wandering is a very natural part of the human experience. It's what lets us think. It's what lets us have creativity. It's what lets us, function. We're not like robots. Our minds need to wander. And a good parallel to that is thinking about how important dreaming is to our sleep. It's unhealthy to deprive the human brain of dreaming at night and disrupting REM sleep on a routine basis. Becomes very, very unhealthy to an individual. And in the same way, if we constantly snap an individual out of mind wandering, it'll also be, an unhealthy set of expectations on human behavior. So these are the things that make, the job very, very complex, because it's not as simple as, hey, let's increase people's attention, when we know that even just this one phenomena, this one aspect of the human experience has very complex and nuanced components to it. So these are the kinds of, not inconsequential challenges that we're working on together.
Yeah. So 99% of the time they're watching, we make a lot of toilet paper. They're watching toilet paper move down an assembly line, so to speak. If you think about the Laverne and Shirley thing with the bottles, that's what we have in our factories. It's just with toilet paper and paper towels. And so 99% of the time, the song is just singing and, they're dancing around the factory. I'm joking. That's not what they do. They're very serious about, there's no dancing in the paper mill, I promise. But, that 1% of the time when they need to interact with the machines is the most dangerous point in their day and could change their lives. But because those 1% happen and the 99.9% of the time of the 1% of the time nothing happens, you can start lowering your risk around the interaction with the equipment, or you have these other pressures coming at you that make you need to alter the right way to interact with the machine. And so I think if we could help people right before they need to interact with the machine, quickly get refocused on, I'm interacting with the machine. It's kind of dangerous, but I've done it before. So if I just do what I'm supposed to do, I'm going to be okay. If we can help people get tuned back in right before they need to do that interaction, that is the hypothesis we think will lead to incident-free workplace. And so, we're working with you guys on how can we build an experiment, because we make toilet paper. We don't do science experiments. So we're working with you guys to help us figure out what do those human experiments look like, and how can we find in a data set, when is the point that we need to get people re-engaged with the environment? Because like you said, if we can do that and we can allow people to daydream and let their minds wander, they're going to have a more fulfilled day, because they're not stressed out and focused, because anybody who focuses a long time on something generally gets a headache after 10 minutes of really focusing on something. At least I do. I don't know if I'm weird or something, but yeah, so that's the key, is if we're coming to a point where we can get technology to aid the people at the right point in time so that they can be incident free.
Absolutely. And part of this journey has actually even just been studying the data and helping the organization have a fuller sense of the data and helping sort out the noise from the truer patterns. And we've seen some interesting things, and we've seen some counterintuitive things. I think we helped uncover some patterns in the data that seem to show that we've got some periods where there tends to be a greater spike in incidents, and it was tough to see that, at face value in the data, and we helped you to uncover that. And part of the thing that's going to be interesting is if Wednesday mornings is a time where there might be a greater likelihood of an incident, do we just simply put in an intervention for Wednesday mornings, be more careful today, but the challenge is we don't just want to pop that intervention in without that experimental framework, because, if it works, that's incredible. And we want to see what variations of intervention are required to help workers become more safe in their behavior without adapting to it, or, perhaps even a smaller success, having them pay attention to it or ignore it, or them never register that intervention in the first place. But that teasing out the noise from the real phenomena has been, it's been pretty data intense, but it's let us bring behavior and data science together.
Yeah, and it allows us to start the conversation about like you said, the example is just Wednesday morning. We can sit down with people and say, what does Wednesday morning look like to you guys? Or talk to the leadership team about what do you guys do on Wednesdays that's different than Fridays, and then you can start that conversation and empower the people who is being impacted to make their own change. So, if you can help people change themselves by themselves, that's way more powerful than me, the guy who sits at the corporate office writing up a procedure and handing it to you and walking away. So, it will stick, and it will make them recognize and learn something about their environment that could improve their overall performance and safety and production. So, yeah. It is very data intense, and it takes an outside person to think about it and bring a new perspective to the data insight. So it's been very helpful.
Bruce, I could keep talking with you. I know that we have gone a little bit over time. So I want to say thank you so much for this conversation. I look forward to us having another one. There was a lot to talk about here, and I look forward to us having the opportunity to share the learnings. I think it's probably okay for me to reveal that we're doing some very groundbreaking work, very pioneering work that hasn't been done anywhere else, bringing together behavioral science with data science, artificial intelligence, engineering, all to help improve worker safety. So I'm very excited about the continued journey that we have together. And I know that you are open to sharing some of these insights that will help, transform the economy and the principles of worker safety. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I look forward to future conversations. Anybody who works with anybody else should be concerned about the well-being of those around them. And, nobody wants to see bad things happen to other people, and toilet paper isn't something people should be dying over. And so if we can do one thing that helps one person, I think we've made a difference. So thanks, and we'll keep working at it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Bruce.
Thank you.